Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Elaine.
Um, Pastor Donna sent me a message this morning. Her kids have been visiting, and they had an emergency. They have to leave today, so she wanted to spend as much time with them as she could before they left. So she texted me her book. So I'm going to do my best to fill in for her today. So let's start with prayer. Father, we just thank you for this gathering, and we thank you for everyone who's here to hear your word and all of those who may hear it on our YouTube channel. Bless these words to just help us know how to be your people and to live in your light. We love you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Um, I'm going to just read what she has here. So,
And don't ask any questions because you don't have the answer.
yes, I have a microphone. It's green.
Oh, no, that's not a mic.
That's for the camera. You don't have,
Recording.
you don't have
Oh.
one for us.
Oh, no.
We have a mic set up right
Okay. Oh,
right
well,
here.
let's
Hear
see.
us.
Let's see what we can do.
She's the one.
Maybe we can do this. I don't know if I could read and turn. But we'll try.
I'll come up and sit by you if you want.
Okay.
I'll hold it.
All right, let's see what we can do. With a teacher's voice, you'd think I would be able to. No, we didn't. Okay, I can't even get this to move this morning. And of course, this is all being, oh, here we go. Okay, we'll try again. So, hello, everyone. Is it on? Oh,
Wait till our audio guy comes in.
oh, I know, but we have to.
So these people know what we have to do.
Hello. Hello.
No?
No. Well, okay, I'm going to use my teacher voice.
Okay.
Oh, well, that should have worked. I heard that thingy. Yeah.
Are you a teacher?
Try again. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I was a teacher. Yeah. Okay.
And
Now.
Ears behind your
Yeah. And eyes, ears and eyes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well after our trip to Rome. Hope you're staying warm. On a personal note, my family and I are thinking about a trip to Rome together. If you have any info or tips or treasures, we would appreciate you sharing them with us. My daughter and son-in-law are going. Lucy won't be taking the trip with us, and that's okay with her. She'll stay home with Sarah and get spoiled. Now, very important reminder. As always, I want to remind you that this class is your class. Anything you would want to add can be added. Same thing for removing things. Talk to me. What would you like to know more about? The Greeks and the Romans, and soon the Christians and Jews. Let me know what you would like to know. We have taken a brief glimpse at the Greek and Roman empires. This week we're going to look at a much smaller community. But first, we're going to look back on the large empires of Greece and Rome for just a bit. We know that Greece grew and grew thanks to the conquest of Philip II and his son Alexander. So it was a sizable empire that stretched across 3 continents: Europe, Africa, and Asia. It really was vast. It covered in the west the Balkans, Greece, and Macedonia. You know the Balkans today. We know this area includes Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Slovenia, Albania, and the European part of Turkey. It's huge. You know, and in the south, the Greek Empire went all the way down to Egypt. And in the east, the empire covered the other part of Turkey, which was called Anatolia, as well as Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And then the empire stretched all the way to the areas around the Black Sea in the north. It was sizable, impressive, but it's important to remember the Greeks started small. They were just a little sideshow. Greece was sort of stuck all the way on the western end of what was believed to be the known world. So, how in God's holy name did old Greece grow into a major empire that the mighty Romans, even after they conquered Greece, The Romans wanted to be like Greece. So who were these Greek guys? We know they were tough guys. They had to be. They had a really tough land to tame geographically. They had little old Greece was divided by several big rivers and big mountains, and the people were divided too. They were tribal, and the tribes didn't get along with each other. So the early Greeks were not united. They were tribal, and they stayed that way for a while. The Greeks did grow, but not into a nation. They grew into a group of city-states. The most famous of these city-states were Athens and Sparta. And for around 500 years, these city-states and others as well fought with each other in the okay, I'm gonna have trouble. When I practiced reading this, I said it perfectly.
Oh, we know what you mean.
Thank you. Say it again. Peloponnesian. Peloponnesian.
There you go.
I had no trouble when I was reading it before. Peloponnesian Wars. Sorry. Around 420 BCE, Sparta makes an agreement with Persia to borrow the Persian navy so it could bottle up the port of Athens. Athens had a great navy. Sparta was a landlocked city-state, no navy. But Sparta bet that the Persian navy was better than the Athens navy, and they were right. So in the last battle of the Peloponnesian War, little old landlocked Sparta defeated the mighty port city of Athens with Persian help, of course. And then the empire stretched all the way to the areas around the Black Sea, and in the north, it was sizable. Whoops, I think I just, Oh, I did, I'm sorry, I turned the page wrong. But this created a big problem because now Persia was in Greece. And the Persian Empire was a huge, powerful empire, and now they are in tiny, ununified Greece. And at the time, that seemed so simple. Persia would just absorb Greece. Greece would cease to exist. But Persia blew their chances in Greece. It is said they behaved poorly, without honor. So the ununited Greeks united in their resentment and hatred of Persia. Now, all this newly united Greece needed is a leader. And that's where we picked up our story 2 weeks ago with Philip and his son Alexander. And that's, I don't know if you got to know Philip very well. I hope so. Philip is important to understanding the world that's being created practically out of nothing. Philip was king of Macedonia in the 4th century. Macedonia is in the northwest corner of Greece. But in many ways, it's not really very Greek at all. It's more like the Balkans. And you should know the rest of Greece looked down on Macedonia, especially Athens and Sparta. They despised Macedonia. They considered Macedonians barbarians, crude boors. But that didn't stop Philip. No, their disgust of him spurred him on. And in 7 years, Philip was able to make happen what had never happened. The barbarian Philip united the snooty city-states to his side, somewhat. Of course, Philip used his barbarian sword to unite them, but they united somewhat, and that was somewhat amazing. But even more amazing, Philip was able to get the Persians out of Greece by using that Greek unity. And now Philip's dreams are growing bigger. So now Philip decides to take Persia away from the Persians, take it for Greece. Persia was a huge empire. It ruled the world, but it didn't rule Philip. So Philip takes his army, which is already battle tested. Philip's army is a well-oiled machine, and he marches into Asia Minor, which is Turkey today. Philip marches to Constantinople, and there's a huge battle. It's world famous, and Philip wins the battle, and Persia falls apart. Amazing. And Philip makes more plans to conquer the rest of the world, but he's then stopped in his tracks when he dies. He may have been assassinated by guess who? Alexander.
Oh.
He left a son, a great son, Alexander, who becomes one of the greatest forces in history. And Philip had prepared Alex to be great. When Philip put out Aristotle into Alexander, and Aristotle put Greek philosophy into Alexander. So he's very well educated. And of course, Philip and Aristotle gave Alexander religion, their style. And at that time, there was a lot of interesting religions around. We talked before just a bit about the religion of this empire, this growing Greek empire. And as you can imagine, the religion was varied depending on the area. But Alex himself seemed to be a believer in the Greco-Pantheon of gods, the Greek gods. They lived on Olympus, which is the highest mountain in Greece. It really is a real mountain, and it really is in Greece. And that's where the 12 big gods lived, way up there. But they came down to earth quite frequently to help or to hinder those of us here on earth. And we can't forget Alex came to believe that he himself was a half-god. He and his mother believed the head god, Zeus, descended from Olympus for the specific purpose of fathering him. And as he got older, he started to act more and more like a god, making everyone bow and kowtow to him. But everyone loved Alex because he was honorable. The Greeks loved honor. It was your job to become honorable. Of course, we're talking about only the men here, not about females. Aristotle taught honor to men only. And we know Aristotle taught Alexander, if you are good and honorable, you will lack for nothing. Of course, as rational people today, we know that's not true. Honor and success are not always linked. We know there are plenty of good, honorable men who are penniless or powerless, and plenty of dishonorable pigs who have everything. Now, Plato got that. So Plato was a more practical philosopher than Aristotle. Plato taught that life was not all about honor. It was mostly about truth. Both of these teachers of philosophy contributed to the basic ideas of Greek education, honor and truth. But there were three major goals of education for the Greeks. When you hear them, think. Do you think these three Greek goals are the same goals of our education system? Are we educating our children like the Greeks did? Also, think about this. Who sets the goals of our education system? In ancient Greece, schools had three mandates or goals. The first was to make sure the students learn to be perfect, because that is the only way the boy can grow up to be a cultured man, so he can become a good citizen. So the goal of education is to create a perfect, cultured citizen. The Greeks didn't want mean, selfish, uncultured little brats growing up and taking control of the government or the army or the academies. So how did that work out for the Greeks? What do you think we want for our kids? What does our society today provide for our kids? How do we prepare our education system to prepare our kids to be good citizens? And of course, we're including female citizens. These are important questions for all of us because as Americans, we invest a lot of money in our education system. We spend at the minimum $20,000 a year for each kid in grade 12 through K through 12. What do you expect from that investment? And do you think we're getting our money's worth? What do you think are the most important things our kids should learn? Of course, the 3 R's, reading, writing, literacy. We expect our citizens to be literate in English. I think most of us do. And the 3rd R, arithmetic. We expect our teachers to teach our kids math and science, physics, chemistry, biology, blah, blah, blah. But there's got to be more, right? What about morals, ethics, beauty? What about honor? Do we teach our kids to be honorable? Not just honest, honorable. Do we expect honor from them? Well, the Greeks expected it. They expected their kids to do what good kids do, obey. Go to school, learn truth and honor, so you could be a truthful, honorable man. And the Greeks weren't the only ones who believed that and who taught that. Actually, the Greeks taught the Romans to expect that from their education system. The Romans expected their kids to behave appropriately, and they were more serious about it than the Greeks. And Roman fathers had more power than Greek fathers. Roman fathers could divorce their kids if they didn't live up to their expectations. Can you imagine that? Don't you think that sounds terrible? Sounds so pagan, so cruel. Today we're going to look at how the Romans heard that in the Greek system, and that what else. I'm sorry. Today we're going to look at how the Romans heard that in the Greek system, and what else did the Romans hear when it came to the religious education of their kids, which of course they inherited from the Greeks. Here in the USA, we have decided to take these two things apart, religion and education, and we pretty much keep them apart by law, separation of church and state. Do you think the Greeks did that? Did Aristotle teach Alexander religion? And how about the Romans? Did they separate the two? Since their religions were pagan, did it matter if it mixed with secularism in government and civil infrastructures? I think it's sort of interesting that since Aristotle was not a pagan, not exactly a pagan, he made sure Alexander wasn't either. So what did Aristotle teach Alex? And what should we look at this and we should look at this carefully, because what Alexander taught, what Aristotle taught Alexander, Alexander taught the world, including the Romans. So here is Aristotle's concept of God. As you hear this, think about what you already know about your God. Ready? God is creator. In fact, in Greek philosophy, God is called the first cause. God caused something to happen in the beginning. This sort of sounds familiar to us. Sounds like the Torah. In the beginning, the chapter of Genesis, God created. And it also sounds like the Gospels. In the beginning was the Word. That's the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the divine Word and wisdom. So for the Greeks, the educated Greeks, God is the cause, the reason for everything. Because God started first, God caused everything to happen. That's why he's called the first cause. God pushes the button, gets everything started, and then that's the end of God's job here. God moves on. He knows where he moves to, but to be sure, earth doesn't interest God anymore. So God probably goes back to heaven, and God stays there, and God doesn't interfere with anything here anymore. What happens, happens. Because people make it happen for better or worse. So if bad things happen to good people, that's okay with God. It's not God's problem anymore. Now these are people problems, not God problems. But stop for a moment and think about that. Do you think that kind of thinking can have bad people, can give bad people the go-ahead to do what they want to do? Clearly, God doesn't care, and neither should you. So you should do what you gotta do. Do what you want to do. Now, this way of thinking is not exactly giving bad behavior God's approval, but it's close enough. Don't you think that kind of thinking is dangerous for individuals and for the entire society? I think it sounds awful, like those awful Roman fathers divorcing their unruly children. But then we take another look at the Greek way of thinking that became the Roman way of thinking. We've got to stop and notice both the Greeks and the Romans got thinking about and talking about a God. They believed in a God. God existed for them, and that is really important because that's one of the reasons that will explain why Alexander was able to tolerate the Jewish God that he meets later, when he meets the Jews and their religion, he meets the Jewish God. Most of the other rulers could not tolerate the Jewish God, especially the Persians. God drove them crazy. But there were big differences between tolerating and believing in the God of the Jews. Aristotle knew that all the stories about the Greek gods and goddesses, all those stories starting with Apollo and going all the way to Zeus, Aristotle knew that they were stories. He knew there were God stories made up by humans, and he taught Alexander, and Alexander believed that. So Alex could tolerate the idea that there's a creator God that existed, one creator God. Now, we don't know if Alexander believed it or if he just accepted the idea that other people believed it. But in any case, Alexander could live with that idea. And because of that, he could let the Jews live in his empire. That's our next topic, Alexander and the Jews. I haven't forgotten that there's an entire empire in between, the Roman Empire, and we will look at Rome. But Rome sort of followed the Greek way of thinking when it came to the Jews' religion, at least for a while. So let's look at this encounter between Alex and the Jews. When did Alexander actually come face to face with the Jews? And we should know, Alexander didn't come to talk with the Jews face to face. No, Alex came to fight with them. One of his military campaigns brings him and his army to Israel. It was probably in 329 BCE, the time when Simon was the high priest in Israel. He was the guy in charge. And the people of Israel were terrified of the leader of Greece, Alexander, and they had good reason to be scared. The Jews knew Persia. It was a horrible empire. Persia tried to destroy the Jews. Forget slogans like "from the river to the sea." Persia wanted them completely gone. From sea to shining sea, no more Israel will we see. But what did Israel just see? They saw the Greek Empire wipe up the Persian Empire. It's gone now. But now, who is knocking on Israel's door? The victorious, terrifying Greek Empire and its great leader, Alexander. And very quickly, Israel realizes they have two choices. Choice one, stand and fight them, but that's really not much of a choice. Little Israel fighting the huge Greek Empire. But there were Jews who made that choice, both when it came to the Greek Empire and again when it came to the Roman Empire. Maybe they were brave choices, but not realistic choices. So what was the second choice? Any ideas? What could Israel possibly do to save themselves from a much bigger, equipped, and trained fighting force? Well, I'll tell you. Israel did what it has always done and will continue to do. They stopped and prayed, and they gathered intelligently. They got the information that helped them make a deal. They came to an accommodation with their enemy. They made a deal, and I'm not making this up. This is the Talmud. The Jews made the second choice. This is in the Talmud. They knew they couldn't defeat Alex and his army. Remember, this is the Alex that never lost a battle. So the Jews decided to deal by making a deal with the devil. That's a pretty dramatic description of the deal, but the entire encounter between Alex and the Jews was dramatic, especially the first encounter, which was probably on purpose. So let's take a close look at the first time they meet. You'll see, very dramatic. Alex rides in on his high horse. That's not hyperbole. That's factual. Alex had a usually high horse, very tall. Now, we talked about the idea that Alex himself was not very tall, 5'5" or 5'6", but he looked so much taller, not only because he had good posture, mostly because he dressed to look taller. So Alex rides into Jerusalem, and all the Israelites came to see Alex, to look at this great man. You would have gone too, not just to see Alex, but also, like the Jews, you would have come to see their guys too, the high priests. You didn't see them every day. And the members of the Sanhedrin, this was sort of the Supreme Court of Israel. You practically never saw them, at least not all together. Well, those two groups were there waiting to greet Alex. So the Jews came to greet Alex right at the gates of Jerusalem, their holy city. And Alex doesn't keep them waiting. He rides in on his famous, very white horse, which is very tall and is also very famous. Alex must have 1,000,000 tall white horses, but his favorite and most famous was Bucephalus. Bucephalus, who was very sadly was wounded and died in a battle in Pakistan. But in many ways, Bucephalus lived on. The horse was gorgeous and strong and loyal and loving. Bucephalus was just like Alex, and Alex loved him, and the horse loved Alex. That horse actually saved the life of Alex at great risk to his own life, so they were both legends. So Alex arrives on a huge white horse to meet the big wigs of Jerusalem and to give the people of Jerusalem a chance to see him. And as always, Alex makes a great first impression. There are reports from ancient observers about this great first impression, perfectly presented to Alex and his horse, who really was very tall, and Alex who made himself appear taller by wearing a huge helmet, and right on top of the helmet, Alex stuck a long plume to make himself appear even taller. We know he wasn't that big, but nobody else did. He appeared taller, handsome, invincible. But the really important part of Alexander's bigness was the bigness of his brain. He was brilliant, and he knew how to work the crowd. So when he comes into Jerusalem, he gets off his high horse, and he walks over to Simon, the high priest, at the temple. And Alex bowed to the high priest, which of course made the discussion that followed much easier for the high priest to listen to Alex. As Alex explained his dream, Alex preached to the priest. He preached his "I have a dream" speech. And it was a strange dream, hard to believe. See if you believe it. Alex says, "I had a dream. I was fighting in a battle, which I win, of course. But you know why I won that, But do you know why I win that, Rabbi Simon? Because an angel leads me in my army." Now Alex is saying all of this loud enough so that the crowds gathered can hear everything he's saying to Simon. So Alex goes on, "Rabbi, you have the face of that angel. It must have been you who led me and my army to victory. So we are destined to work together to win. Do you believe that? Any of that?" Well, Rabbi Simon believed it. The high priest of Jerusalem, one of the chosen people of God, chose to believe that. But honestly, what other choice did Simon have? And Alex also made a choice. He chose to work with those chosen people, with the Jews. He could have crushed them easily, destroyed them, subjugated them, but he didn't. Alex made a deal with the Jews. He told them, "Be loyal to me, be my loyal vassals, my political vassals. Pay your taxes to me, and I'll make sure you can remain autonomous." Now it's good to remember Alex wasn't always this nice, and the Jews knew it. So out of a kind of gratitude to Alex for these autonomous accommodations, the Jews did a few things for Alex. First of all, all the Jews agreed to name every male child born in the following year Alexander. So the name Alexander became a Jewish name. It never did sound Greek to us, did it? And after that law, the Jews got busy setting up a system and installing that system. And of course, it was a system to tax themselves. It was a tax collection system. The temple and the temple leaders were in charge of the system, collecting money from Israelites and getting it to Alexander. What could possibly go wrong? Well, just like everything way back then, and as it happens today, corruption seeps into the system. The system is way too big, and no one is totally in charge of collecting and monitoring the money. So huge sums of money are disappearing. Does any of this sound familiar? But finally, there are some whistleblowers who show up on the scene in Jerusalem. So they're sort of shofar blowers. And just what they report, and guess what they report? Fraud. They report the uncovering of fraud in the system. There is fraud all over the system, but especially at the bottom of tax collection system. And so the story goes, all tax collectors are creeps, thieves, stealing your hard-earned money and keeping it for themselves, not sending it to Alex and his government so that the government would be able to continue to operate somewhat freely. No, these dirty money-grabbing tax collectors were endangering the whole system. So of course the word gets out. Jerusalem is a small world, so it spreads quickly. The warnings. The religious authorities caution people to stay away from tax collectors. Don't eat with them. Don't sit with them at the synagogue. Don't even talk to them. And that works for a while until another religious professional comes along and changes that rule. Just so you know, that particular Jewish religious professional changed a lot of rules. But now, look at what he's doing in this rule. He's eating with tax collectors, talking to them, hiring one of them to work with him as a disciple. Good job. Not great pay, but a wonderful retirement package. And who was this new Jewish guy who changed the rules? Jesus. Just so you know, the tax collection system really was pernicious. It had a gradual but permanent and damaging effect on the whole society. Listen to this and tell me if it sounds familiar. Nobody trusted the government anymore. Imagine that. Most of them were seen as guilty, part of the system of fraud. Imagine that. And this sad situation practically destroyed the morale of all the people. Who can we trust? The whole Jewish community was devastated, their trust destroyed, and they stayed that way long after Alex got back on his high horse and rode away into the sunset. And then Alex died. He died so young, barely in his 30s when he left this world. And he left this world in chaos because he didn't plan for his demise. But the empire that Alex left didn't splinter into tiny little fragments. His empire was not balkanized, broken up into small areas that hated each other and fought with each other continuously. Think East Central Europe. Well, this empire, the empire that Alex and his father built, did not balkanize, but it did split into two major pieces. It split into the kingdom of the north, ruled by Seleucids, which was known as the Seleucid dynasty, which was headquartered in Damascus. The other half of Alexander's empire was in the south, ruled by a man named Ptolemy, or if you're feeling phonetically, Ptolemy, but it's pronounced Ptolemy. And he was headquartered in Alexandria, Egypt. Now these two generals agreed on almost everything, except the border between them. They were always ready to fight for that little area of land. And guess what that little area of land is sitting smack dab in between them? Israel. Israel is the disputed borderland. So the Jews get caught in the middle of that fight, between the two generals, and it was a very uncomfortable position to be in. And Israel stayed in that position for the next 130 years. And all during that time, Jews had to make decisions. Sometimes they had to lean north, and sometimes they had to lean south. The Jews were constantly just trying to keep things balanced between both of these two empires. But both of these empires constantly tried to tip the scales. The South tried to win over the Jews using cultural persuasion, and the North tried to do it by force. But we're talking Israel here. And surprise, surprise, guess who survived? Do you know who is running the Seleucid Empire today? No, you don't, because it no longer exists. Same goes for the Ptolemy Empire, gone. But look who is not gone. Look at the only democracy in the Middle East. Look who is surrounded by enemies calling for its destruction. And yet, look at who is willing to sit with these enemies and make plans and sign accords that will bring peace and prosperity to the region. So, after all the danger and destruction, who is left standing? Israel. And just so you know, this tiny nation, chosen to be the light to the world, is still shining. And just so you know, that still makes a lot of people very unhappy. How do you feel about that? Think about it. Think long and hard how long the world has been thinking about that. Let's think about that, and we'll share what we think next week. When we talk about a major battle between some determined Jewish citizens who decided they weren't going to take it anymore, the Maccabees. And then we're going to take a rather detailed look at what the Jews brought to the Greco-Roman world for the first time ever. I wish you a good week. Stay warm. God bless you all.
Very nice. Very good job.
Thank you.
That's a lot to read.
Yes.
Yes. Where's John? I guess, okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and we'll get this posted on our YouTube page, and hopefully there will be lots of questions that you can send to Pastor Donna. She really does love to get those questions. And I'm going to turn this off now. And if you have anything you want to talk about, anything in particular that you feel